what makes someone an entrepreneur. And in my case, the way I see it is to have goals and to not give up trying to achieve them. I studied actually first at the University of Liverpool in the UK, and then I did my master's at KTH here in Stockholm.
What was the master's?
So I actually studied Entrepreneurship and Innovation Management, which had a lot of SSES courses. I'm one of the co-founders of an edtech startup that started with reference management, and now we're trying to find a way to democratize the way research is being shared. And actually, research is something that you still need to pay for in many areas and countries, and we're trying to find a better way to access that research. That's a very good question. I always wanted to be an aerospace engineer. I loved airplanes, and I actually grew up traveling a lot because of my parents. So I always thought I wanted to work at Boeing or Airbus. That was my dream. But then I got a scholarship to go to China, and that's where I got exposed to markets in general. And I was studying Mandarin and engineering, and I got offered a job as an English teacher. And I realized that as an English teacher, I was making sometimes 3 times the salary of an aerospace engineer in the UK. So that actually took me to the path of actually exploring where do I want to go with my life. And of course I like what I do, but maybe going with the market and trying to understand what is the opportunity and how you develop.
So then you came back from being a teacher, you came back from your trip?
Yes, so I was there for a year, I finished my program, and then I thought, okay, instead of going into a big company, maybe it would be a good idea to explore. And for me, what I thought at the time was the best way to learn is to join a startup, because in startups usually there's no structure. So you either move around and figure out what you're good at and what needs to be done, whereas in a bigger company you go more into a specific role. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of understand and learn a little bit more about myself and where I could fit in different roles. So that's how I ended up joining a startup here in Stockholm. That's an interesting question, because I mean, I think it very much depends on the person. Some people very much know what they want to do, and some people are very artistic. Some people really like music and they know they want to work with music. In my case, I really like math and physics, and I thought engineering was a very good way around it. But it really, for me, what opened my eyes was to just try, and if I didn't know, at least to take the next step that I could see that could be a good opportunity. And that meant sometimes not going with what people recommended. For example, my parents always wanted me to go into engineering, whereas in my case I thought maybe a better way to explore is to actually look at startups. And that actually has helped me realize a lot more about myself and not just work. That also helped me with everything else, including work. I think that's one of the challenges that, especially when you're growing up, right? You go from the point of listening to your parents and what they're teaching you, then you have friends and what they do, you want to fit in. For me, what kind of clicked was when I started realizing what do I want, and that made it easier to start focusing on the things that I want to get there and not so much on what people want out of me. And I think that's a process that you have to go through, and it might take 5, 10, 20 years. But for me, realizing that, for example, I want to have my own business, I want to do well financially, that means that you need to take certain steps, which meant that, okay, then I need to do this, this, and this. And once you have an idea, maybe I don't know that I want to be a manager, or I want to work in finance, but these kind of long-term goals help me at least look towards people that have done it and have a better perspective on what are maybe some of the things that I should focus on. A lot, yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I love about SSES and entrepreneurship in general is the idea of having people that you can look up to. And growing up, I grew up in a small town in Spain. I often say that they don't teach you to dream enough. Like we don't see rock stars. I mean, we have football players, but it should, when you realize that a super successful entrepreneur or a musician is someone that is not super different to you, and that you could also be that person, I think that inspires you to do better. And that's where that started with my dad being a source of inspiration because he knew what he wanted and he went for it. Then, it could be with mentors, people in business, it could be bosses, friends. And overall, I love autobiographies, books. As someone mentioned it once, is there's probably hundreds of thousands of people that have been through where you are now, and many of them have written about it. So that's a good way to get ahead and hack the system a little bit. There's a lot of, usually any autobiography, I would say, I really recommend it. Actually, Marianne at SSES recommended the book by Trevor Noah. I knew him as a comedian, didn't know his story, super encouraging. There's a lot, Phil Knight, Shoe Dog. There's an author that I really like, Clayton Christensen, that wrote the book, How Will I Measure My Life? Another book that actually a professor at SSES, Nadav Shir, recommended, Man's Search for Meaning. And it's also a great book on a psychiatrist that went through the Holocaust and looked into what made people push through hard times. So I think that was a very eye-opening book. University helps, and that's usually what I always say, university is a great starting point because as a student, you can actually engage with a student and people are more open. I remember at university in the UK, you could just get on a bus, and if you're going to university, you could just say, are you a student, and then start talking. So that's a great starting point. And then as soon as you realize or you know the areas that you want to go into, find events, groups. It depends on the person. If you're very extroverted, I think it's very easy to find events and groups. And for example, for startups in Stockholm, there's, before COVID and now it's starting again, but there's pretty much an event that you could probably join every day. So it really depends on what you want, and then it's a measure. As an introvert, I also think that now, I'm not an introvert, I would say I'm more of an extrovert, but I also find a lot of information online, a lot of great content on YouTube, for example, where you can find a lot of network and you can engage with people, and I think that's something that's changing a lot. I think it's beneficial to learn the language, and I haven't learned it myself, but I definitely recommend it. And why is because you truly understand culture when you learn the language, and I think that's very important, especially when moving to Sweden. Everyone speaks perfect English, which means that you don't really need Swedish. But if you really want to engage and understand the culture, I think learning it is very important. The main reason why I didn't learn it is that I plan to move somewhere else. So then I don't know how many Swedish people I can talk to. But I think it's very important to kind of try to learn the language if you can. So at first, I remember that SSES was being promoted or shared during my master's program. I had no idea what it was. And then I remember that a friend shared on our master's group that they were looking for course ambassadors and course assistants at SSES. And that's the first time that I looked them up. And I really liked the idea of what it stood for. And then I realized that they actually offer a lot of the courses that KTH was teaching us. And that's where I got more interested and actually decided to get more involved, and I applied for one of the course assistant positions.
So you first applied to the position and then started attending workshops and courses?
Yes, yeah. So it was actually, I was a master's student. I was having courses through my master's that were in partnership with SSES or offered by SSES. Then I joined as a course assistant, and that's where I started joining other courses and workshops as a course assistant. And then I was attending the social events that SSES also had. So I was trying to get everything I could out of SSES, yeah. I remember the professors mainly. I think there was a lot of great teachers. Greg Van Urek, he taught ideation. I think his teaching really changed the way that I see my life and the way that I approach entrepreneurship and work. And I think that was a really eye-opening course. Then Nadav Shir, I was his course assistant for, I believe, growth. And that was also a very philosophical approach to entrepreneurship, and really interesting way to learn about what it means to be an entrepreneur and how does it relate to well-being, for example, in one of his courses. So yeah, a lot of great teachers that I really remember, and were quite inspiring in many ways. Yes, so I mean, if SSES has a unique value proposition, I would say that's one of the main ones. The fact that you study with students from different programs means that you're not always, like, usually if you study business, you're with business students, you don't really engage with doctors or, like, I don't know, musicians. SSES creates that opportunity where students from different departments and different programs can actually meet together. And I think that's very valuable because it creates discussions that you would maybe otherwise not have, and it just brings different perspectives. So that's something that I really liked with the courses in general. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the people at SSES have gone to do very well too, like they have their own jobs, some have started companies. I actually started a project with two of my master's students, and now one of them has his own company with his wife, another one is a developer. So I think SSES creates a great environment where it attracts also people that want to learn and want to test and like want to engage. So a lot of people that I really looked up to at the time and still now, yeah. That's a very interesting question, and I think it's a very important one too, because the question is also what is a well-lived life and what does that entail? And I think going through the education system, a lot of the time you learn the technicality of it, but you don't really question the philosophy behind it. And I think entrepreneurship can be a good way to make that connection, to really understand what it is to venture, what it is to try. And that really helped me kind of understand, okay, what is it that I want? It's not just working for the sake of working, or you can work on something you enjoy, but the concept of life entrepreneurship, how do you live an entrepreneurial life? And I think that's something that really changed my outlook. And there's actually a book by David Goggins. He's like a crazy sportsman that has been very tough on himself, and he has, like, at one point he had the record for most pull-ups in one day, over 4,000 I think. And he says something that I really like, and he says, I don't care if you believe in God or not, it doesn't matter, but imagine that you go to heaven one day after your life, and that God opens, whoever is God opens the book of your life, that he looks at what he had planned for you, and he could react in one of two ways. He could be like, oh, I had so much planned for you, but you didn't do it. Or the other way around. It's like, no way. Half of what you did, I didn't even have here. Like, you've lived so fully that, like, I'm so proud. And I think that also is entrepreneurship. How can you try and, like, be so full of life that you try, and if it doesn't work, it's okay. Like, you just try again, and at least you learn something. So I think entrepreneurship can really bring an aspect of life that makes it exciting. So that's what I'd recommend everyone to at least try to know what they want. And I think entrepreneurship very much relates to this. I think it's, I think they're as entrepreneurial as a business entrepreneur. Like, that's why, like, entrepreneurship is very much seen as a business endeavor. It's like usually seen from like a management perspective, like to start something that creates value. And I don't think, or it's not the way that I see it. Of course, you can ask professors on the definition of entrepreneurship, and you'll probably get hundreds of definitions. But I think it's also like it can be approached to many things. Like, to be a good musician, it takes perseverance. You need to keep playing and practicing and put the hours in. What that probably is a better entrepreneur than someone that is trying to do it with business. Same with sports. Like, to be an Olympian, you need to have consistency. And that is, in a way, entrepreneurship for me, that you actually spend the time to achieve a goal and have a pursuit that maybe it does benefit in the end, but at least try. That's something that I think should be more connected to entrepreneurship, and it's not just making money. I think it applies to a lot of things. You can start a social project where it's a non-profit and your aim is not to make money, but you're still an entrepreneur. So I think the question starts in what is entrepreneurship, and once people are more open to the idea that it applies to every subject, then I think it's easier to connect. I mean, it's interesting because I would ask back, what is what makes someone an entrepreneur? And in my case, the way I see it is to have goals and to not give up trying to achieve them. And it can be a very simple goal. It can be, I don't know, starting a small project, a knitting group, it could be an entrepreneurial venture, and trying to do 10 sessions where maybe the first 10, 2 people show up and still going. I think that's entrepreneurial. The same thing applies with business, that you start a company and you get 100 rejections and you're still pushing. So I think the main thing about entrepreneurship is understanding that it's okay to get rejected and to continue pushing, because you know that the end goal will eventually come. It's just a matter of how. And I think that approach on how, that's an approach to life. Like it's maybe not this way that I will take, maybe it's a different way, but having that mindset where you know what you want, you'll find a way around it. And I think it comes down to a very basic mindset where it's like, do you think that you can create what you want, or does the system determine what you can create? And I think Steve Jobs actually said it very well. Like, if you really think about it and you look into the system, you realize that the world is made by people that are not so much smarter than you, and that they're changing the world in their own ways, which means that you can also do it. The question is, do you want? And I think many people don't even ask themselves that question, and it's like, I didn't even know I could create value. So I think the first part is discovering that you can. I wouldn't say burnout, but I was done with working at a startup, yeah.
So how did you realize, first of all, that it's like a peak point, and then what did you do to help yourself to get better?
I mean, I think the first part of, like, in my case, is understanding where is the limit between me trying and not getting it through, or just being lost in translation of what's happening. And I mean, it depends, because if you have if you're executing in a business and you need to perform and there's a lot, I mean, it can be overwhelming, and I'm sure that it can turn to burnout. If you had to do 20 sales calls a day, or like if you need to do interviews all the time, like it can be very tiring. So I think on one side is how much of the situation is in relation to me and how much is it in relation to the environment where I'm in. And I think it's important to realize what is a limiting factor. Maybe it's that I'm not well prepared enough and I need to learn. Maybe it's that the manager is asking too much and I just can't deliver. So I think understanding that part helps. But in my case, we were starting a company, and I saw that the limiting factor was that I actually didn't know where I could add value. And I didn't know if it was just outreach, that I needed to do more of product development. And that meant that I actually left for a trip and went for 3 months just traveling to kind of try to understand what is it that I want and what are my weak points, what are the things that I need to focus on. And sometimes I think taking time to reflect is very important. I think if you think about it, we have phones, so you have social media, then you have Netflix, then you have family, then you have work. You're not really quiet for any second. And I mean, that's why now I understand why people talk about doing meditation. I think it's not just doing meditation, it's just being quiet and listening to yourself. What is your mind telling you? And I think we live in a world where we just don't stop. So I think having that time to just, okay, what is it that is making me uncomfortable? And being able to ask yourself that question and to think about, okay, it's just that I hate my work. And it can happen. You can have a very bad boss or do something that you really don't like. Or maybe it's like, no, actually, I'm lazy and I need someone to push me, but no one is pushing. So what is the problem? And I think realizing is the first part, and then taking time to think about it.